time. I'd like to invite up now both our two economic speakers, Kate Barker. Many of you will know Kate from her time on the Monetary Policy Committee, and also the fact that she's chair of the Economic Advisory Group to DETI. Professor Neil Gibson. Neil heads up, of course, the Northern Ireland Centre for Economic Policy. I'd like to invite up the Minister, Dr. Stephen Ferry, and Alistair Ross as well from the Department for Enterprise. You're all very welcome indeed. Please give them all a very warm welcome. Now, this is the time in the morning before we split up into our sessions, our breakout sessions, where actually you've got a chance to ask questions and interact. But I want to start with one or two if I can, and then we can go on from there. We've learned a lot in the voting this morning about some of the things holding back businesses in Northern Ireland, in particular exporters in Northern Ireland. Kate, finance wasn't mentioned perhaps as strongly as I thought it would be in some of those answers, but certainly was earlier on in terms of growth of businesses. To what extent do you think finance remains a big issue for businesses that you see across Northern Ireland?
Well, as you'll probably know, the Economic Advisory Group conducted a big piece of work on finance earlier this year. And it's a piece of work I was really pleased with because I didn't want it to be about bank bashing. I wanted it to be a more honest piece about what some of the issues were. So we came out of this with some issues for banks, areas where they thought they could improve their customer service and their knowledge of business. We came out of it with issues for businesses needing to be more open to other sources of finance, venture capital, equity finance, and I think that's important to confidence. And we came out of it with some issues for government because, frankly, some of the national schemes just don't work as well in Northern Ireland as they do elsewhere. I'm actually a bit sorry that government hasn't got on with implementing some of the recommendations a little bit faster, but I know there is some progress, and sometimes you can only supply the ideas and hope that people will pick them up. But a more general point about finance I'd make relates to where I was before at the Bank of England and relates to the new governor, and he's often portrayed in some of the papers as fighting a losing battle with the markets. That's not what Khan is about. He's not really about the markets. He's about trying to say to you, look, banks are going to stand behind the economy until we get growth. And we saw that from the Fed yesterday too. That's a really powerful message. I hope it's going to help economies move forward.
That's a very global message that you've just put there, Kate, because it's about the big players in the global market. But you also mentioned that you wish that the government here in Northern Ireland would get along with some of the recommendations made by the Economic Advisory Group. Alistair, from the Department for Enterprise, Trade and Investment, do you want to respond to that at all? Kate's hurrying you along, in a sense.
Yeah, and Kate's group report to the Minister, and the Minister is keen to implement some of those recommendations indeed next month. I think one of the implementation panels will be meeting for the first time and trying to promote some of that stuff. Anecdotally, we hear in our own constituencies, we hear from businesses that meet the Minister about access to finance. It's a major issue. I think made more difficult the fact we don't have locally owned banks as well, and we're limited in what sort of pressure we can put on with them. The Minister, Arlene Foster, the previous Finance Minister, Sammy Wilson, the current one, Simon Hamilton, have been meeting with the banks regularly over the last number of months and years to try to resolve some of these issues. One of the difficulties we've actually had in Northern Ireland is that we couldn't get some of the anecdotal evidence quantified because we didn't have regional figures. I'd spoken to Simon Hamilton earlier in the week, and he thinks we've made some progress in being able to get regional data in terms of lending from banks to small businesses here, which will help us in terms of identifying the problem. Where we have stepped in and so on, I think some of the flexibility is that we in DETI have, through Invest in Northern Ireland, have had an access to finance initiative. And in the short, when the banks weren't providing that capital to businesses and helping them grow, as a department, we've had to step in where the banks should actually be doing that. And I think that has helped a number of companies and prevented them from being held back.
Great. Another issue, though, that's been identified throughout the morning, and we've been privileged, Minister, that you've been with us for most of the morning, and you heard presentations both from Lee at Citigroup and from David as well. Both of those focus quite a bit on the people element of what we're dealing with here and the skills base. I was really impressed listening to Lee extol the virtues of the skills base here in Northern Ireland, but as we know, that's part of the skills base. That's at the very high end. Do we think, because we know businesses also have skill shortages here in Northern Ireland, that we're getting it right in terms of all across that skills base, and what more can be done?
Yes, we're certainly on a journey in this regard. I mean, I'm very clear that skills are the key driver of the modern economy. No longer are we talking about a race to the bottom in terms of competing on cutting costs necessarily. We're talking about a race to the top in terms of our ability to compete based upon the quality of skills. mean, I'm pleased that we're getting good feedback on some of the things that we are doing, but we're very clear there's a long journey still to be travelled in some respects in this regard. There are things that we're doing very well. I mean, I like to think that in Northern Ireland we're big enough to matter in terms of the world, but we're also small enough where we can be very hands-on in terms of government, and whether it's Invest in Northern Ireland, working very closely with clients, to my own department in terms of working directly with businesses on a one-to-one basis around their skills solutions, to getting feedback and making adjustments in terms of the skills offering. And to give some examples of this, I mean, one of the most successful things we've done recently is our ICT action plan, where we listened to what was coming through from the ICT sector and put together an action plan in less than 6 months, which is a very quick turnaround for government. And we're implementing that and adjusting it as we go along and putting in place new interventions. Now, you rightly make the point that we're doing well in terms of things like graduates, though within that we need to have a stronger focus on STEM subjects, and I'm pleased to see we're seeing a shift in terms of applications to university, but that also has to trickle down throughout the entire education system. But we have a legacy as well of a profile in Northern Ireland where we've had historically people with low or no qualifications, so we radically need to improve those. And one of the most important interventions we have at present is a major review of apprenticeships. We want to see a massive upswing in the numbers of opportunities offered across a range of occupations, and actually move that model up the skills ladder. And that way, hopefully, we can actually respond more directly to the day-to-day needs of business and have a more close match between supply and demand.
I'm sure that's something that most of the businesses in this room certainly would want to see. Neil, the Minister just mentioned something about what I would call an hourglass labour market. Heavy at the top, heavy at the bottom, not a lot in the middle. Do you think that's one of the biggest problems from your vantage point affecting Northern Ireland businesses' growth potential right now?
It's certainly a challenge, but it's a challenge that we all face and our competitors around the world face too. One of the things that I often think is important to consider in skills is it's actually quite difficult to improve. The department and the minister are doing very well, but we've all a responsibility to play in this. I often make the remark that you can train me all you like and I'll never be a centre forward for Arsenal. There are things that are hard to do. Well, some people mightn't think playing for Arsenal would be hard, but we're not all going to be brain surgeons or CEOs or leading export sales managers. There's a finite supply, so we're all competing for those. So what that tells me is that all of us in this room have to play our part in helping bring people forward, perhaps from that lower end of the skills spectrum up towards the middle, getting the people at the top with the undoubted skills that exist in this room to give of their time to help bring people up through that spectrum. Because education, obviously working in the university, I see this, we can do our bit, but we need, businesses will often say to us, look, these children are not business ready. And I ask myself, how business ready was I really? When I went out and set up my own business, I had to learn a lot of that. So businesses have to play their part to say, why are my team and my staff, how can I get more inspirational people and pull them up into the middle of that spectrum? How can we say to the people with the lower formal skills that actually there are huge market opportunities for them? I mean, the amount of people we have inactive and unemployed is simply a wasted resource. So what is it that we can get them to do? But my challenge to Northern Ireland is we've all got to play a part. You look at your businesses, if you're not about to lay people off, if you're about to take people on, make sure your staff know that. Get them inspired in the vision that you're trying to grow for your business. Some of the best ideas I get in the university or in the companies I've run are from the secretarial staff, the student placements that we have, listening to people who are young, starting their career. Don't let them get jaded and let them start to feel they can be part of improving that hourglass.
That's brilliant. Now, I want to come back to all of you because something, that seems to come forward time and time again is around confidence, aspiration, whether our horizons are far enough out, whether we're really looking globally. And Mark, in his introductory speech early this morning, set out the challenge. Not a lot of exporting businesses in Northern Ireland, not a lot of businesses that have been able to do what David's been able to do in his business. So I wonder if I can ask you all very briefly, is there one thing that you think could change to help more businesses in Northern Ireland get inspired to get out there into the world? Kate, can I start with you?
Yes, it's absolutely the case, given the size of this market, that without exporting, we aren't going to be able to grow businesses here. Not every business can export, some just don't, some just are not in the right product areas. But I think the key thing for me is thinking very creatively about different markets. And you commented on the fact that I talked from a global perspective. But when I talk to businesses, even small businesses, I'm always struck by what a global perspective people have and how much understanding even small businesses will need of international business trends. So good information, good links, and actually help from larger businesses to say, this is how we did it. I thought the presentations today were very good on that. This is how we did it. You can do it too. And it's belief, willingness to explore, and frankly, willingness to take risk. And you're right that if you haven't got confidence, you won't take risk.
Minister, I'm not a journalist, but I'm going to ask you a journalist-style question, just to be a bit provocative, if I can. Given that need for aspiration, that need for global vision, that need to look outward, is the education system and the training system that you oversee failing to sort of give students a little bit of that global perspective?
Well, I think that there's certainly a very strong awareness in Northern Ireland of the rest of the world, but I think where we are falling down is in really encouraging people to see business as being a viable career. We have still a very conservative culture that values the professions and often a very inward-looking approach in terms of how people will build their careers. Good careers policy, I think, is the foundation stone of a strong economy. And there is almost universal concern. Every time I go to a business meeting, we hear concerns about careers. There is going to be a major review of careers between my department and the Department of Education in the next few months. And we want to try to engender this process of getting people to think about where the prospects of growth lie in our economy, and in turn to actually encourage people to think about business. And if we're actually truthful about this, if someone at 17 or 18 says that they want to open up a business and perhaps maybe not go to university, the school would actually be worried about the situation, the family would be worried, they wouldn't embrace it, they would see it as a threat and a danger, and we need to move beyond that type of culture.
I think that's right. Neil, languages, skills for export, cultural sensitivity, some of these are soft, some of them are quite hard, some of them are about how do you get the customs paperwork done. That's quite a hard skill. It's one you have to learn. Some of them, like languages and understanding different cultures, that's a little bit different. Do you think that we're getting to a place now in Northern Ireland where people who are employed, either in work or about to go into the world of work, have some of those skills needed to think global?
I do think that exists, and I would make two remarks. The first thing is, anywhere you go in the world, when you meet people from Northern Ireland, they're very successful. The ability, as we all know, to talk very eloquently.
And a lot.
A lot, yes, well, that often refers to me, is something that sells very well. It's an important part of the international sales force, so it should be a natural home for us. But we have to get, and I know this isn't always a very popular thing to say, but when we're dealing with our young people and when we're dealing with our careers advice and when we're dealing in university, we're always about the positive, and that's right, about the global opportunities and the way that the world can work. But there also needs just to be a little bit of a hint of fear as well. There isn't a great enough sense in Northern Ireland that actually if we don't get out there to compete internationally, things can get much worse. We have a standard of living here that's much heavily subsidised by the British taxpayer. Now, that may not last forever. And when we look at our young children, when I'm trying to rear my two children, there has to be that balance of what they can brilliantly achieve, nurture that and encourage it, but also the sense that if we do not succeed, the economic conditions and consequently our standard of living will get worse. So I think we need to be realistic about what the cost of failure is too. And I think children and young people respond to that balance. It's not just about patting them on the back, telling them they're doing brilliant, finding ways to tell them that their coursework was not terrible, it was quite good, there were areas. You have to be honest at points, and we have to be honest with ourselves that we need more to get the economy that we'd be proud of.
I think Neil's channeling the English Education Secretary, Michael Gove, a little bit there. Children flying by the seat of their pants might be a little bit more successful. But also there's a question about whether our companies can be more successful. Neil just referred to the subsidisation of parts of the Northern Ireland economy through transfers and various other things. Obviously, in the Department for Enterprise, you've got to come to a way to help businesses deal without some of those over time. Do you see Neil's point about living a little bit more scared also applying to businesses as well as to individuals so that they also can up their game?
Of course, but I mean the primary role at this moment in time from the department is to help support business and help to build that confidence. Confidence is a major issue. I think events such as this that can showcase successful companies who have been able to go out and export helps to build that confidence and encourage others to do so. The reason that Minister Foster can't be here today is because she's currently in South Africa, showcasing the best of Northern Ireland, showcasing some of the companies that we have and helping them get into those markets. And actually, although we have very few exporting companies in Northern Ireland, somewhere we've been pretty successful is in those emerging economies in the BRIC countries in places like South Africa and Turkey, and we've had some degree of success there. I think it's over a third of increase in the recent couple of years. But also in terms of the smaller SMEs, we're dominated by SMEs in the Northern Ireland economy. I was out earlier on this year in the Netherlands, where the Going Dutch programme from InvestNI is encouraging smaller companies to go and export for the first time. And by giving that support to small companies, they do get the confidence to go out there and try things for the first time. And in many ways, the Netherlands is a perfect place to go for the first time and first experience of exporting, because it's a similar sort of culture. It's a good location in Europe. And we found actually that many companies who have gone through that program have then got the confidence to go and do it themselves, and that level of subvention and government support isn't necessary any longer.
So confidence remains key here too for the businesses, not just for the individuals. One way we've tried to build up confidence in the Chamber network recently is to look at our friends like our partners here today, EasyJet. When EasyJet launched its route from Gatwick to Moscow, we took 15 SMEs with us on that inaugural flight. And our challenge, I think from Northern Ireland Chamber to EasyJet in future is with every new route you launch, will you take 15 SMEs with you to that new market so that we can get more Northern Irish businesses out there? If you want to commit to that very publicly, I'd be very delighted if you would. Kate, Alistair's just mentioned success of Northern Irish businesses in some pretty challenging emerging markets. David talked about Russia a moment ago, and those of us who've dealt with Russia know just how hard a market it can actually be. I was in Brazil fairly recently, and the cost and the bureaucracy and the difficulty of getting into Brazil is huge. And some of these markets are starting to slow down a little bit. If you were a betting woman, where would you say some of the opportunities might be for Northern Irish businesses that are looking to get out there in the coming months?
Well, I think this is a big question, and of course, in a sense, the question that's facing us all at the moment is we look as though we're moving away from what's been a very difficult period, not just for the Northern Ireland economy, but for, of course, the UK, and indeed most parts of the world have had a very difficult experience over the past few years. Now that, and then we then moved over the last couple of months into a stage of, I thought, rather over-optimism. But actually, in that stage of over-optimism, we started to see, as you've rightly pointed out, some of the big economies, India, for example, really starting to faltering and have some difficulties. And that tells us that the financial difficulties of the world, some of the problems that Citibank helps us solve, we were told earlier today in what I thought was a really powerful story, that those difficulties have not yet gone away, and it's not going to be that easy to work out who, as we move out of this period more permanently, and I think that's going to take quite a long time, probably another 5 years before we can start to think, actually, we've got the financial thing behind us, which parts of the world are going to go well. And I guess this comes down to looking at the things you always look at when you're thinking where to go. You're looking at who's good at having good governance, regulation, so you've got some certainty of what you own, who's good at growing their own consumer businesses, and actually who's good at exporting to you. Because if they're not good at exporting to you, they're unlikely to be a growing country that you'll be good at exporting to. So I think trying to understand those businesses and understand where the gaps are in those markets that haven't been filled by local businesses, all those things are important, and saying which part of the world perhaps is a bit less important.
But I'll still try to push you. Name me one or two places that you think are up and coming.
Well, despite the fact I've talked about difficulties in India, I think India is a really exciting place because it's got huge opportunities still to bring a lot of people into the cities, and if you go there, you're struck by how entrepreneurial it is. It fails a bit on some of the governance side, but actually the difficulties they're having at the moment, I think, will cause them to look at governance. I was very struck by what you said about Latin America. Latin America's had a history of not, quite riding waves, but actually, again, they've improved some of their legal systems. I think they're generally much more ready to come into the world, and I think that is going to be an important part of the world. And you'll notice I've kind of stayed away from some of the sort of obvious Asian markets, and that's because I think they've had this period of very strong growth. Now they're entering a period of consolidation, actually dealing with some of the difficulties of that growth, and that may hold them back a bit. Okay,
I'll fly the flag for Latin America, certainly. In the last British Chamber survey across UK business, only 28% of exporters were in Latin America. If you compare that to 45, 50, 60, and 80% in markets across Asia and Europe, it's a really unexploited market for us. Look at countries like Colombia and Peru, where we've got a free trade agreement with the European Union as well, and we're not taking advantage of it. We've got to do better, I think, on that. Let me change topic a little bit from export and come to the Minister for a moment. You're here today at probably the biggest chamber conference, economic conference Northern Ireland's ever had. I can probably confidently say that. We've packed out Titanic Belfast for you this morning. In your experience, what is the best thing that the Chamber does in terms of working with you and colleagues up in Stormont to make sure that the needs of the business community are properly articulated?
Well, first of all, I would recognise that the Chamber have a really strong record of putting on excellent events and that are extremely well attended. I think the heart of the answer to your question lies in very strong relations being built up between the business community and government. For sure, the business community has to challenge government. I mean, this has to be a constructive relationship, but also one where if you feel you need to criticise, to push, to encourage us to do more, by all means do that. In turn, we have a duty to listen and then also to respond. And I think under devolution in particular, while not all of the macroeconomic policy isn't evolved, we have a lot of levers that are in our local control, and we have the scale in which we can actually directly listen and respond very quickly to feedback that we receive from a business. There are things where we need to improve in some areas of our response time, and at times the whole process of consultation and the time around developing the strategies can sometimes be frustrating. We need to shorten that down. Hopefully there's some good examples of practice in recent years where we've done things a lot more quickly in that regard. And in particular around skills, it's important that you articulate to us your skill requirements. In turn, we'll try to put in place much more flexible means by which we can address those particular needs. And together then we can actually really develop and really build something on the basis of what we're seeing here today.
Do you want to put employers more in the driving seat when it comes to skills? Because this is a debate
Yes.
that we see in all parts of the UK, really. Employers saying, I'm not getting what I want, I don't have any control over the money, so I can't direct it the way I want to.
Yeah. Let's give a few examples in that regard. I mean, first of all, we have higher education. And higher education now is becoming much more responsive to the needs of the economy. For the first time, we have a higher education strategy in place. And in terms of feeding into undergraduate courses and the balance of what is offered, it's important employers have a voice. Also, the knowledge transfer that comes out of universities is critically important in terms of building upon innovation. In turn, if we look towards things like apprenticeships in future, employers very much have to shape that process as we go forward. At times, they haven't been in the driving seat. The training providers have sometimes shaped the nature of that provision. So employers need to tell us what they need. They shape the type of programs that will be put in place to support the training of apprenticeships. But in turn, there's also a challenge for employers to embrace these type of schemes, to take on an apprentice. Don't see it as being a risk, see it as a productivity gain, see it as something where someone will be trained at the very direct needs of a business and will have the skills that will allow your company to grow. See it as a means of getting higher level skills. Also work with us in terms of placements. The more we can encourage young people to see the opportunities out there and actually really understand where the potential lies, the better it will be. The more you can help us to engender employability skills with young people, the better we're all going to be as well.
I can only endorse that point about apprenticeships. We're a business of 25 people. We've got a 19-year-old apprentice working with us now, and she's added so much value to the business just in her first few months that it's already well worth all the extra management time, effort, and training we have. If we all took one on, we wouldn't have some of the skills gaps and unemployment problems that we face. And Neil, you talked a little bit earlier about, how you get people up the chain. Isn't that going to be one of the routes that we do it? Because let's face it, with things like tuition fees, with things like the cost of going to university, giving some stronger market signals, and the government in the UK in particular finally realizing that actually it's not a good idea to have half of people go to university. Are we going to give enough focus to on-the-job training, technical education, apprenticeships now?
Yeah, hugely important. You've got a very difficult triangle in skills. You've got to try and ask what it is that you and the marketplace need today, what it is the marketplace will need tomorrow, which will include businesses who are not in this room. So we can't just ask you what you need, we have to ask businesses who are not here. And then the third part of that triangle is, what are our children good at? It's very difficult to force all children to go into certain routes. And whilst I applaud the direction we're taking towards increasing STEM subjects, I hope we'll do the same with languages. You've got to be willing as a policymaker to be surprised. You've got to be surprised by the business. Who would have thought? I've been in meetings years ago, David Dobbin will have been the same, in which thinking of the value add from the agri sector and the processing sector would not have been considered. It would have all have been only about the potential of the city groups, and yet we could have both sharing a stage and telling us the examples. Your brilliant business could be in textiles, it could be in farming, it could be in construction. So we've got to get a little bit less prescriptive about what we think. Brilliant businesses are brilliant businesses, and it's very difficult for policymakers or for economists like me to tell you where those opportunities will be. We need to listen to what you say. So in answering the question, if I look at what we hear this morning, there's a challenge before me as an economic policy researcher. We need to do R&D in economic policy. We need to say, if costs are the issue, are we looking at the rate space and reforming it? If it's about skills, how much are we as a university responding? And we need to do that research. It is wrong to think that those ideas are all just sitting on the shelf and we don't have great ideas. And hopefully Northern Ireland's getting better now at having that discourse through businesses into researchers responding to that. And hopefully our job is to translate your needs into languages and material that government can turn into actionable policies.
I think all four of you have said you welcome challenge in one way, shape or form, and I think you've got an audience of 400, 500 people in front of you, all of whom will be lining up to offer you that challenge in the weeks and months to come. You said you wanted it, now you're probably going to get it from these employers, which is probably a good thing. Last question for you all, and I'll start with you, Alistair. What one thing should the businesses in this room do today when they leave here in terms of growth?
Well, I think they'll learn a lot from today, and especially if they go to the expert panels and some of the support, just follow up on it. I think is the important thing. If you meet with other businesses who you want to share experiences with or listen to them, follow up on it. If you meet somebody here from some of the support, so if it's Invest Northern Ireland, follow up on it and make sure that you don't miss any opportunities that there are. I think too many times that we come back to the confidence word, that when there's a lack of confidence, businesses don't follow up on opportunities that are there. There is so much on offer in Northern Ireland. There's so much there that they can benefit from, and the support mechanisms are there. I just think they should follow up on that and take a risk.
So don't just write the actions list, finish the actions list. Kate, we're starting a new group of evangelists for business and for growth here. What one thing do you want them to take away and do here in Northern Ireland?
Well, I think the thing that strikes me about the stage we're at is that we have gone through a period where people were worried that businesses were failing, a lot of concern about access to finance, everybody saying, there isn't enough there to support businesses. And now as we start to recover, I think it's great that you're talking about growing business, but I think it's really important that businesses take that seriously, because there's always a threat when recovery comes along. And quite a lot of people will point out that actually low rates and a supportive climate have helped a lot of businesses through. And if today you're sitting there complacently thinking, recovery is going to see me through, it's not. What will see you through is picking up the lessons people have been talking about today, thinking about what your business offers your customers. Is it right for your customers? How can you grow? How can you develop skills within your business? I think those are really powerful messages. You can't expect government to supply you with the skills. You've got to think about how you grow them yourselves as well. And if you don't have that ambition, these years as we turn into recovery are not going to be the ones that see you through. They'll be the years when you fail.
So we've got follow-up, we've got proactivity. Neil?
I would say two very quick things. If you've got an ask of government or of universities or anything, articulate it, move out of the language of asking what someone can do to help. Why should somebody fund you, and why should someone invest in you? So if you give me this, if you tax me differently, this is what I'll return to you. If you give me these types of children from the education system, this is what I will make out of that. So quantify the language, because funders and governments and pension funds need that language. And secondly, if you do feel inspired today, go back and listen to your staff again. Sit them down, make sure they don't miss the lessons, talk to them about what you find out, and do a bit of listening and see what good ideas are already percolating within your own business that maybe you haven't been listening to for a while.
I ask you for one, I get two, but they're both good. So
Well, that's an economist, there's always going to be two.
And last word to the Minister.
And in a sense, picking up from Neil in terms of current staff, and I have to talk about skills, it is my job, and but it is actually probably the most important of the drivers. Just to make the additional point that we shouldn't simply see the skills agenda about those people who are entering into the business, whether it's from the university or through apprenticeships or some other type of route. Bear in mind that if we look ahead to 2020, maybe about 80% of the workforce of 7, 8 years' time from now are already in work today. So it's important to continue to invest in your current staff as well as those who are coming in.
A message that we've heard throughout the day from Lee Meyer onward. Ladies and gentlemen, could you all join me in thanking our panel in the